Welcome to Book Rising, a podcast by the Radical Books Collective.
I'm happy to be ushering us into the next portion of this wonderful program and to celebrate another recent publication of Palestinian literature in English translation. I have the copy of the first book here with me, but not the second yet. But for those who don't know me, I'm Meg Arenberg, joining from Philadelphia in my capacity as managing director at the Radical Books Collective, but also as a translator myself, not from Arabic, but always delighted for conversations about translation and with fellow translators. So we're happy to have Marcia Lynx Qualey back, who again is founding editor of Arab Lit and Arab Lit Quarterly, but here particularly as translator of this new young adult series, Thunderbird, by Sonia Nimr. And we're lucky also to have the author herself. Sonia Nimr is a Palestinian writer, storyteller, oral historian, and a professor of philosophy and cultural studies, as well as being a translator in her own right. She's published more than 24 books for children and young adults, has won many literary awards, and has been nominated for several international prizes, including the Astrid Lindgren and the Hans Christian Andersen Awards. So I want us to get a chance to talk about the Thunderbird series itself, but I thought since we're kind of shifting genres here and moving away from poetry, that we could start just with a little bit of background with regards to Palestinian children's and young adult fiction generally. And I'm curious if this is an established genre in Arabic, if there are set conventions and readerly expectations that go along with this kind of literature for young people, generally in the Arabic-speaking world, but also particularly in Palestine.
I mean, I have an answer. I'd be more interested to hear what Sonia has to say, but I would say that in Arabic, there for a long time there was not this defined genre of young adult literature, and teenagers, young people, you read maybe like a specific cadre of books. And many people talk about growing up reading, for instance, Ahmed Khalid Tawfiq, Bil Farouk, this pocket novel series, this genre literature, horror, etc. But they weren't specifically marketed as young adult literature. They were just, sort of pop literature, maybe. Scholars talk about things starting to undergo a change about 2000. And that in the world of children's, I mean, obviously, so picture books have been a thing for much longer, but specifically about this genre of young adult literature, specifically for literature for tweens and teens, that it developed as a genre more recently. I personally didn't come to it until about 2010, which was when Fatma Sharafuddin published Fatin. There are novels that came out before that, but that was the first one I stumbled across. And since then it's been growing a lot with a number of prizes centering literature for teens. It's undergoing, I think, a lot of growing pains. And I would say that in terms of conventions and expectations, it's a lot less than in English. If you approach a US or UK editor saying this is a YA novel, they have like a very strong list of expectations about what that means. Mm-hmm. The character must remain a kid throughout the book. The main character must be slightly older than the target readership, unless that character is like a dragon or something, and then they can do whatever. They're just like a very strict list of expectations for what it can be. Whereas in Arabic, I find that it's still a genre that's in the process of being defined by authors and readers.
Yeah, I think also the prizes like Ittisalat shed a light more on, and it became more available and more productive after all these Arabic prizes. I think the first one was in 2013, which after that, people became more interested in reading and writing for young adults.
Yeah, I absolutely. Noor won that first one in 2013, and after that there was a lot more attention. Sort of before that, I think there just was not a lot of critical attention paid to, and even though like Ahmed Khalid Tawfiq might have written a lot of books that were really popular with teens, there was no taking it seriously. This is sort of changed a little bit.
Yeah. But it is becoming more widely read, and people are starting to look for them actually these days, simply also because young adults used to read translated books mainly from English, which wasn't satisfying. It wasn't something to go with their culture. And so, okay, they enjoyed them, I'm sure, but somehow they were looking for something to voice their own culture. And they're becoming more aware of it.
Yeah.
I don't know about what it's like in Palestine, but I feel like for a while in Cairo, every bookstore I went to, there were translations of Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and of course, Harry Potter's like omnipresent.
Yeah. Yes.
So here we have something that Palestinian children can recognize themselves in differently than something like Harry Potter, certainly. Sonia, could you tell us something about the origin of the series and where the idea for the story came from? We're launching today the second, but I understand it's a trilogy, right? So there'll be a third.
Yeah, it is. Actually, the whole idea came to my mind from the Phoenix. Once upon a time, I used to work at the Ministry of Tourism and Archeology, and Phoenix came a lot in our archaeological artifacts, like jars, plates, etc., etc. And I think this is somehow where I felt that the Phoenix had a symbolism to Palestinians that has been used later to symbolize perhaps the Palestinian steadfastness and being under occupation. So many occupations through history, and they came, they're still alive and they're still here. So perhaps this is where the idea came from. But also the idea, I felt that I needed to have a 13-year-old girl to be the heroine of the books, because as you mentioned earlier, Harry Potter is there is always this male white European or American person who saves the world. So my idea was that why not the Palestinian to save the world? You expect me to talk more?
What's that?
Do you expect me to talk more?
No, that's great. Unless you had more to say. No, I had a question also for Marcia, just to hear you talk a little bit about your experience of translating this series, but also young adult literature in general. I know from your own podcast that you involved your own son in the project, which I would love to hear more about. But also if there were specific translation challenges with these books, or with addressing literature to this particular audience.
Yeah, I mean, I would force him to come in right now, but he's at his friend's birthday party right now, so he's not at the apartment at the moment. But yeah, I mean, so I kind of fell into translating, this being my specialization, works for teens and tweens, because like many people, I, as an adult, enjoy reading these books. and I actually meant to say earlier too that I've found that, you know, there are many of the readers of Arabic YA are teens, but there are also is a fandom of adults too who like these kind of, you know, fast-paced, exciting, accessible narratives, these fun stories. In terms of particular challenges for this series, one of them is that Noor is traveling back through time, and she is engaging characters and times and places that have resonance with kids who are reading it in Arabic, right? Whereas for the English language reader who comes in maybe not knowing any of the history of any early Islamic history, any history of this area at all, the names don't have the same meaning. So I was thinking of it like, I used to feel frustrated with Doctor Who. Like, he can travel through all of time and space, and he sees Agatha Christie like 3 times, and he keeps, you know, Winston Churchill, like they go 10 times back in time to talk to Winston Churchill. But because this is sort of the easily accessible universe for the English language viewer, right? So I understand that, you know, if Doctor Who was to travel back in time to the Mamluk period or something, you know, it would require more context for the reader. So I think that is like the challenge is to create a way in which, you know, the child reader can see, maybe in part through Noor's eyes, like how excited she is to see these particular people, how, you know, how important these moments are, without necessarily, you know, it's not like, oh, I went back in time and I saw George Washington. Well, immediately you understand from like a US context, for instance, oh, George Washington, he was like a big deal. He was, you know, like him or hate him, you know who he is. But these characters, she travels back in time and she understands, you know, it's important for her, but the English language readers doesn't have that sort of apparatus around them.
Right. But she's also not hugely knowledgeable about these periods of time that she's traveling back to, right?
No, book three, I think, is the one where that's, I think, the biggest challenge. Sonia can talk about it.
Okay. The problem is when I mention some names in my books, they are familiar in Palestine, they are familiar in the Arab world, and even they're familiar in Muslim world. I mean, everybody knows the Mosque of Al-Aqsa, everybody knows the Caliph so-and-so and the leader so-and-so in the Islamic and Arabic history. So I did not need to explain who they are. And as Marcia said, I found it very difficult. We've been talking back and forth with Marcia. Do I need to explain more who these people are? Because they are not known in the Western world. And it is difficult, again, in a novel to put footnotes and explain who these people are. So it was very difficult to do this. So I would add perhaps 1 or more 2 sentences, a little bit in the novel to explain who these people are, which I'm thinking to do, rather than footnoting them or trying to explain to the Western audience, especially in book 3, where I mention in Arab world, big names. They're really big names in the history of the Arab world, but they're unknown for a Western audience. But on the other hand, they are learning about new culture anyway. So even if I don't go too much into explaining, the whole idea is that she got excited to meet these leaders. At least the reader will know that these leaders are important in our history. And on the other hand, I did not put my own point of view about these leaders. I mean, some of them I don't like, to be honest with you, in our history. But I'm trying to be partial when I talked about them, because I'm talking about the period in history, which is very important. at least in Palestine and the Arab world and in Islamic world in general. But on the other hand, it is a small piece in the third book, because, and then I moved on to create a whole new world, which is, makes the reader forget the first section, if you like, or gets drawn into a different kind of adventure. So somehow I felt that even mentioning these names, it's not going to stick a lot in the minds, because they will be interested to know how the story is going.
Yeah, that's true. There are so many made up creatures in book 3 that I don't think that they'll stall out if they don't know some historical figure.
I somehow feel also, having read the first 2 books, that by now we're already in love with Noor, right? So we're going to follow her wherever she goes. Whatever it is that she's excited about, we'll go there with her. And maybe it sparks some interest for readers for whom this is, really unfamiliar historical.
So in the third book, it was outlandish and haywire and completely new worlds and completely new creatures. So I think I went over the top with it, but I like it. I enjoyed writing it, actually.
It's fun. It's a lot of fun.
But Marcia, I'm curious just to go back to Raphael's involvement. I mean, was this part of what he was doing, consultant on what is too unfamiliar, or what kind of role did he play in the process?
Absolutely. So Raphael doesn't only work for me. Raphael also works for Savad. He consults a lot on dialogue. So does this sound? I sometimes read a book and I think the author/translator was trying to sound like a young person, and instead they sound corny. Yes, and just generally, I ask him, like any editor, I would ask, did you stumble over a sentence? Put a comment in. Is anything confusing? Put a comment in. He doesn't, for instance, tell me where a comma should go or something. Yes, he's there to kind of reflect back at me a first reader's impression.
Yeah. I wonder if we could talk a little bit, sort of thinking back to the theme of the very first conversation we had about the challenges around publishing translations of Palestinian literature, and whether there are particular challenges to this genre, to publishing YA books. I mean, you can imagine that maybe publishers would feel that they're somehow steering clear of politics, that this is kind of a safe zone. It's just kids. It can't, or on the other hand, that books targeting children are particularly sensitive. And as you've said, Sonia, the Thunderbird series is a time traveling series, so we're getting a lot of history here, and even in the present, there are scenes, there are encounters with Israeli soldiers at checkpoints and so forth. So I'm just wondering if you ran into challenges related to any of that with this series when seeking publishers or in the editing process.
So, I mean, we've been lucky to work with sort of small publishers for this book. So for this series and for the other book, and I think they, Dena is Iranian American and Michelle is Palestinian, and I think they've been extremely respectful of these books. I think, as I said before, when you're pitching, it's sometimes difficult. If somebody ghosts you, what is the reason for that? What can you put that down to? To me, some of the, so when looking at Palestinian literature and say secondary school curriculums, which I spent some time doing, it is all this multiple narratives. What can we put in a narrative alongside an Israeli story? Mm-hmm. So I couldn't find any teachers online talking about teaching Palestinian literature in the classroom as Palestinian literature. And then also it was really, I don't know where I put this quote at the moment, but some of it was really, I don't know, it's clearly so difficult. There's one Palestinian educator who wrote a long piece about how no matter what she does to put strong research into her curriculum and to take care that it's, whatever, fair and balanced or whatever, as if a literature curriculum, that's what it's for. But, she says, she's attacked from sort of parents, interest groups, etc. So I think it's not from the publisher end, but then people have difficulty reviewing and engaging, particularly this book, versus Wondrous Journeys, I think, was easier. It was an imaginary, historical period. She traveled all around. This is very specifically Palestinian. And people have told me, no, I would prefer to work with Wondrous Journeys. This one, and then maybe that can be the gateway through which people get to Thunderbird. Thunderbird is harder. There's a checkpoint, and there's a. So I think writing about it for people and engaging it, reviewing it is more difficult.
Yeah,
scarier.
This is the part where I hate to talk about, actually, because when they have Israeli books or Jewish books, they never ask for a Palestinian narrative.
Yeah.
I don't know why the world is scared of Palestinians. What we have is people under occupation, so it is natural and it's normal to talk about occupation. And occupation everywhere in the world is really bad. Now the whole world is standing on their feet because of Ukraine, which is okay. We are against occupation anywhere in the world. Why, when it comes to Palestinians, you have always to put the narrative of the Israelis? This is one of the, I'm as a writer tired of defending myself all the time. And we are tired of always explaining to the world and being, because I heard the first session, Marcia, and the whole idea is we are tiptoeing around the world. We're scared and we are afraid to talk about our narrative freely, simply because the world says, oh, you're a Palestinian, so you have to put the Israeli. Why? Why should I always be on the defensive while I'm under occupation? And on the other hand, now everybody is worried about Ukraine. Yes, true. But occupation anywhere in the world is really bad. So this is one thing that really hurts, and it really pains me as a writer and as a Palestinian to be always on the defensive. And we always have to, be nice and put the other narrative and be careful when we write. I don't want to be careful. Yeah. This is my life.
Yeah, I found it very disappointing. I found myself disappointed in so many of these educators. Obviously, Palestinian literature can be put in a context, but Israel is also not the only context. Palestinian literature relates to Arabic literature, and it can be put in this context. It can be put in the context of different indigenous literatures. It can be put in many different contexts. But in sort of curriculum after curriculum posted online, it was just presented in this one way.
Right.
So, they always feel that Palestinians mean political, or Palestinian means anti-Israeli, or Palestinian means anti-whatever. Not necessarily. We can write literature which is, in brackets, normal. We can write adventures, and we also can write about Palestine.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the things that I like about young adult literature. We have literature with dragons and jinn and there's Tahrid's mystery novel and all sorts of other kinds of literature, of narratives in Palestine.
Sonia, I wanted to give you a final last word. I'm sorry that we lost Marcia in the middle of her thought. But I did want to ask you a little bit about what your experience of publishing these texts in Palestine has been. I mean, what the reception was of Thunderbird among Palestinian youth, without all of these, frustrating, complicating, politicizing questions that are happening in the rest of the Western publishing world.
No, actually, in Palestine, in parts of the Arab world that they managed to read my books, they found them interesting. Not on put politics apart, it is the whole world of these creatures and of these mythical creatures from mythical Arabic literature. They loved it, actually. They loved the experience, especially girls, because somehow they felt that they were empowered by Noor and by, hard determination to save the world. So in both in Palestine and in some parts of the Arab world, actually, they received it very well. And I've been going to schools and discussing the books with kids. Somehow some of the boys asked why you don't have boys in the books. So I decided, so they felt somehow being missed out. But in the third book, I decided to put a boy just to break the pattern, if you like. But still the heroine is Noor, who is a girl. And in Palestine, they really loved it.
I can imagine that to be true. I loved it myself, but thank you both so much for this conversation. It's been lovely to talk to you both, and I'm excited now for the third book, and for the second one to be in hand. It's now on the way, or when's the exact publishing date for book 2?
It should be on the way. Yes.
Fabulous. Thank you both.
Thank you, Meg. Bye.
Bye.